Hello and welcome back. We're starting a whole new adventure today. One I feel kind of conflicted about, if I'm honest. I've been using Unraid for a few years and I'm super happy with it. It's a great combination of storage server and Docker host. It'll also do VMs, but that's what proxmox is for. But I've been loving Unraid. Like, even the issues I've had with it, the forum for it is fantastic. The user support is great. Hence why I'm conflicted about my next project. The downside to Unraid is that it tries to do a lot of things. It tries to be a storage server, a Docker host, a VM host, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I want to start to peel those concerns apart. So, eventually that's going to mean either a high availability proxmox cluster or a Docker swarm or something to host all of my work streams, and then dedicated file storage. For today, though, we're going to start by figuring out how to offload a simple Docker container from Unraid onto Docker running on Alpine Linux VM. To keep things simple, we're going to save a more complicated container like Nextcloud or Plex for a future video. And today, we're just going to move my instance of Audio Bookshelf. To do that, we're going to need a few things. We need to create an Alpine VM in proxmox. We need to install Docker on that VM. We need to map some network drives because we're only moving the actual processing. We're not moving storage. That's going to stay in Unraid for now. So configs, the actual audiobooks themselves, all of that staying in Unraid. Once all that's done, we need to install the Audio Bookshelf Docker container. We need to wire up config and storage to pass through to that. And then we need to compare what's running currently in Unraid to what's running in Docker. The idea is one-to-one parity, so completely same library, same progress, same everything. Let's go have a look at what's up right now. Right now, this is my audio bookshelf. You can see I've got a bunch of books in here. Some of them have been finished. Some of them have progress markers on them. I want to replicate exactly this, just running in Docker, not running in Unraid. Let's get to it. The very first thing we'll need is to run over to Alpine Linux, to their download section, and we want to grab, well, at least I want to grab the x86, x64 version of the virtual version of Alpine. Because I'll be running it in proxmox, this feels like the right one. If I was running on bare metal, I would go with standard. I've already downloaded this, so let's head over to proxmox and set up a VM. In proxmox, it's worth pointing out that we could do an Alpine Lexi container, or LXC, I actually don't know how that's pronounced. The documentation specifically says not to do that, so we're just going to create a VM. Click on our node, create VM. We will name this Docker because we're super original. We'll assign it the Alpine Virtual 318 ISO for install. System side, we'll leave everything as default. I did try this once with UEFI BIOS. It didn't go well. That's probably in the docs, and I should probably read them at some point. I haven't, and it didn't. Stick to CBIOS. For disk space, we'll stick to 30 gigs. This thing isn't going to be storing anything. All the configs, all the data, that's going to stay in Unraid. So this is really just to run Docker. And if you're running more than 30 gigs worth of Docker, you're probably not watching this video to learn how to do it. Let's move on to CPU. We'll give this thing just a quick 4 cores. It's not going to be doing much. Same thing for memory. We'll give it 4 gigs. Network, we'll assign it this one, which is the one that lives behind a VPN. And that's it. Confirm and go. One thing we do need to do real quick before firing this up is heading over to options, yes, boot order, and we want to make sure the IDE drive with the boot ISO is first in line. Once that's done, we hit OK, start the VM, and head into that console window. Here, all we need to do is log in, and then we need to run setup Alpine. This installer will run us through, well, the Alpine install. I use TechnoScience's tutorial to get this right. I'll link that below, but we'll walk through it here just real quick. Keyboard, we'll stick to defaults. Qualified name, we'll call this docker.local. The Ethernet connection is fine. DHCP is fine. We don't have any manual configs to do. Set a quick password. Time zone, we'll leave it UTC for now. No proxy settings for this one. The mirror list tripped me up the first time. For version 3.1.8 at least, there are 76 of these, and if you just mash enter to get through them all, you're going to fast track through the rest of the settings and set some things you don't want. So, we'll get down to 76. One more. The one that works best for me is Berkeley. Once we've picked our mirror, we can say no to this extra user option. We don't need anyone else. OpenSSH is fine for this, and then we do want to say yes to giving root SSH access. We'll let it generate a key. Here we do want to let Alpine format this disk so that it can properly, well, install itself. So the disk is SDA. We want to set that up for system use, and it'll do its thing. Say yes to letting it format. And that's it. Before we reboot, there's one thing we have to do. We'll switch back to proxmox. And in the hardware section, we're going to go kick out the disk drive, just so that on reboot, it doesn't try to reinstall again. With that done, we'll switch back to the VM and we'll say reboot. Once we're back here, all we do is log in. And we're ready to install Docker. To do that, we do apk add docker. If you get this error, it means your sources aren't set right in apk. To fix this, we have to go into Vim. Now, some people swear by it. I'm not a fan, but we'll muscle through. Type vi, etc. apk repositories, hit enter. Mash, I think it's I a couple times to get into edit mode, and then just delete that hash mark. That's it. Hit escape, :WQ, and enter. And then let's try again. And there we go. Now we're installing Docker. And that's done. Now all that's left is configuring network shares and installing Audio Bookshelf. Let's start by getting the share set up. Since my plan is to keep everything on Unraid, we're going to make 2 network shares for all the configs and all the Docker-specific storage I have already configured. To do that, we'll run over into Media. We'll make 2 folders called config and storage. To set up our shares, we have to run back into Vim. We want to edit fstab, fstab, whatever it's called. Hop into there. Go back into insert mode. We are taking shares from my Unraid server, which is 10.68.2.1/app data. We're mounting that into media/config. That is a sys share. And then I think I just set username and password. And then set the type and pass to 0 and 0. And we'll set up the same share for getting late, I can't type anymore. For storage. And that's it. Right, quit. Test it with mount-a. And then let's make sure that share actually works. And there we are. With all of that out of the way, the only thing we have left is actually installing Audio Bookshelf. To do that, first we need to tell Docker where to find the image, and as luck would have it, we can find that info in Unraid. If you look at the configuration for whatever Docker you're moving over, it'll have a repository. More often than not, you can take this, copy it into a browser, and it'll drop you right where you need to be. From here, we're going to copy this wonderful line and then pay quick attention to the available versions of this. I'm going to go with latest. Edge, it seems like a nightly developer build. That's a little spicier than I want to live. So when we put this into Docker, we'll switch over to latest in our case. Let's head back over here and plug in that Docker pull line. And in our case, it'll be :latest. I totally forgot. We got to start the Docker service first. There we go. Let's try that again. And there we go. We're pulling down data for this image. And that's it. We have this image downloaded. Now we need to know how to tell Docker to fire it up. So we'll switch back to GitHub for just a sec. Back in GitHub, the Audio Bookshelf project makes this super easy. Scroll down a little bit, find the install docs, and it has a wonderful template for what this needs to fire up. So we'll take this and plug it into Docker and we'll be good to go. We'll fire this up with docker run -d for detach mode and then a / to let it know this command continues in the next line. First we'll set the port. This just maps port 13378 to port 80 on the pod so that you can access it from outside Docker. Again, continue this command on the next line. Now we need to set the config location. So in my case, that was media, config, audio bookshelf. There we go. That maps to config. There's a second one of these for metadata. In my case, that lives in the same place. /meta. And last but not least, we need to point it at the actual audiobooks. Storage, audiobooks, and that goes to audiobooks. We need to give this thing a name. Nice and human readable, audio bookshelf. And then one last line, we need to point it back to the repository so that it knows where to look for updates. That's it. Enter and go. At this point, we should be able to see it running. There it is. Took me like 4 attempts to spell that right, but here we are. It's running at localhost port 13378. Let's go have a look. And here it is. Let me log in real quick. And there it is. Same library, same state, just like we wanted. Now, obviously this thing isn't the final form. The goal is to have this running in something more durable than just a single VM or a single proxmox machine. I think the future here is going to be either a redundant cluster or Docker Swarm, something along those lines. But this is an important first step in separating our storage from our processing. And yeah, we'll keep going with this. I'm not quite sure what our next outing will be yet. We might migrate Postgres onto its own hardware. We might get started on high availability Docker of some sort. Or we might tear down the backup server and rebuild it on TrueNAS. I'm really not sure. But come back on Monday for more shenanigans. As always, thanks and take care.